Good morning, family. I'm going to go over where to oil and how to break it down and to clean it. So if you just purchased an Apollo, you want to look at the needle and the last four, well, there's four numbers on there. The last four numbers here are 13 and 15. That means that this needle fits a 1.3 nozzle and a 1.5 nozzle. The only one that is not like that is the 1.0 or the 0.8. They have their own nozzles. So that's kind of a little tricky thing. 0.8 is what I usually use for automotive, base coats. 1 I use for powdered glazes. 1.3 for 2K isolantes, primer and like bin. 1.5 I use for one component waterborne products, and then anytime I use a catalyst on the Italian coatings Renner or Malaysia, I use a 1.8 or a 2.0. The only time that I use a 2.0 is with the Renner catalyzed, and a 2.0 is beautiful. 2.0 is a little bit too big for the Malaysia, so you don't want to mess with that too much. Also, if I'm doing vertical hangs, I like to use the 1.5 so that I can layer multiple light passes until I get it to melt together. And that's the key thing, is making sure that you put enough product on there to where it levels out. So also want to show you, I didn't clean my gun out the other night. I left it pressurized up with the primer in it. And as you can see, this right here is paint coming out of that gasket. That means that this gasket wasn't tight enough and the paint was leaking back there. It didn't happen like that. That was overnight with it pressured up. I usually leave it pressured if I have material in there, like a single component. You can leave it in your hoses overnight, but it will settle. So you can't just start spraying the next day. You got to get in there and stir it, and then bleed your lines, and then stir it back. But I really want to break this down and put it in acetone. The spots that you need to oil are behind the threads on your nozzle get oiled, and this oil is peacock oil. Came from a peacock. So I'm just gonna, get the vat together, and I am going to put all of this in there. This usually doesn't get any material on it because it's just the air, so I don't have to soak that in acetone. This usually always gets overspray on it. The other place that you want to make sure that you oil is inside this little, there's that gasket in there, and that gasket is what I lost the other day because I didn't put it in right. So you always want to add some oil when you go to put it back together. You want to add a drop of oil on there and keep that lubed up right there. You also want to put oil right here where that gasket goes, so that because what it is, I'll just show you in here. So if I unscrew this, you can see how the paint was leaking out of that. What's inside of here, if you put a tool right there, this is what's inside there. This is inside there. Can you see that? And then what happens is when you tighten on this, it squeezes this around your needle and keeps it from leaking. If it's too tight, your needle won't go back in, and you will when you let go of the trigger, it will spew a little bit of paint. So I had someone call me yesterday and they said, hey, Oscar called me. He said, I got a Graco and every time I let go of the trigger, it spits. I said, well, possibly this fitting is too tight or it didn't get cleaned out around there and it's impeding the needle closing it. A lot of times also if your fluid adjustment is too far back, you're not loading up that spring in there. And in order to make sure that you've got that spring loaded up, you only want to see one thread of threads there. So that you want that to be loaded up. If it's way back here, the spring is just loose and it doesn't push your needle back. So if that gasket in there is too tight or it's not lubed up, your needle won't close and it'll spit, especially when you're using pressurized cups, which pretty much every one of ours are. So I'm just going to put some of that in some acetone. I'm going to put some gloves on our respirator. I'm going to wash that all and just get it all cleaned up and then lube it up real nice, put it all back together. The other day what happened was I did not have that oiled and I lost the gasket. So let me show you real quick. So this is a 5/8 deep socket. So there is a gasket right inside there. Right in the back of the trigger back there. And if that gasket isn't, if you don't oil this, it'll push that gasket out and then you'll feel like when you go to spray, you'll feel like air is leaking from up here. But it's not, it's actually leaking from in here. So you want to make sure that all of that gets cleaned out and that everything is nice and oiled up inside there. If you soak your gun in acetone, you're obviously going to remove any of the oil that's there. So you just want to make sure that, you don't really have to soak this back here. Well, in acetone, really the only thing that I'm going to do is wash the outside and the inside up here, because your fluid is up here. There really isn't any fluid back here. So the only thing that needs to be cleaned back here is the outside. So what I'll do, I will, make a little vat and then I'll pour the acetone and I'll let it sit like this with this outside. And I'll just clean all of this part off. So I'm going to turn my fans on, put my respirator on and my gloves on because points of oil, trigger, gasket, back of the fluid nozzle, inside this compression gasket, and then also I like to lube up the threads on my fluid seal, on my fluid adjustment. So hope that helps. Once I get these, are you my emotional support animal?